A man sits in a stone room. He does not know who accused him. He does not know what, specifically, he has been accused of. He knows only that he was arrested at dawn, that his property was seized before any verdict was rendered, that his family has been left without means, and that the men who will question him today are the same men who will judge him, sentence him, and distribute the proceeds of his ruin. The room is cold. The inquisitor enters with a file of papers, flips through them slowly, shakes his head in practiced disappointment. The subject feels, before a single question is asked, that the inquisitor already knows everything, that resistance is not merely futile but somehow absurd, that the only remaining path is confession. This is not the beginning of an investigation. This is the final stage of a mechanism that was set in motion long before this man was born. A mechanism that does not seek truth so much as it manufactures compliance, that does not protect society so much as it feeds upon it, that wears the language of salvation while operating according to an entirely different logic altogether. To understand what is happening in this room, one must first abandon the story that has been told about this institution for centuries. The Spanish Inquisition was not, in its daily operation, a religious tribunal concerned with the purity of the faith. It was something far more precise, far more modern, and far more disturbing. It was a self-financing apparatus of political control, the first institution in the emerging Spanish state to wield uniform power across all territories, and it achieved this power not through theological sophistication, but through the systematic inversion of every legal and social principle that makes trust between human beings possible. Its genius was not in the ferocity of its punishments, though those were real enough. Its genius was in the architecture of uncertainty it imposed upon an entire society, converting every conversation, every friendship, every commercial transaction into a potential liability, and making the population complicit in its own surveillance. Consider the legal structure that governs this interrogation. In an ordinary court, an accuser must stand before the accused. Here, the accuser is invisible, perhaps a business rival, perhaps a debtor, perhaps a neighbor who covets the accused's land, perhaps someone who simply wishes to demonstrate their own loyalty by naming names. The accused cannot confront this person, cannot test their credibility, cannot even know if they exist. The presumption is not of innocence, but of guilt. The inquisitor who investigates is the same authority who prosecutes and sentences. There is no separation of powers, no external review, no appeal to a higher justice. The manuals that guide these interrogations advise the inquisitor to cultivate an aura of omniscience, to leaf through documents with theatrical deliberation, to let silence do the work of the rack. The psychological pressure is not incidental to the process. It is the process. The system understands that a human being who believes himself already caught, who believes that resistance will only deepen his punishment, will construct his own confession with greater thoroughness than any torturer could extract. And yet torture remains available, permitted when guilt is deemed half-proven, a category so elastic as to mean almost anything. The inquisitors themselves know that confessions produced under pain are unreliable. The Directorium Inquisitorum of Nicolas Aymeric acknowledges this openly, stating that torture is fallacious and ineffective. They know this, and they continue, not because it produces truth, but because it produces the formal appearance of truth, because it allows the institution to maintain the fiction that it uncovers rather than constructs guilt. The subject who confesses under torture and then repeats that confession the following day, as protocol demands, provides the system with the procedural cover it needs. The inquisitor can tell himself that he serves justice. The victim can tell himself that he has been given a chance to save his soul. Both are participating in a ritual of mutual deception that allows the machinery to continue grinding forward without anyone having to acknowledge what it actually is. But the most devastating instrument is not the rack or the strappado. It is the Edict of Grace, later renamed the Edict of Faith, a document read aloud in churches that transforms private conscience into public surveillance. The edict lists dozens of heretical propositions, behaviors, and beliefs. and then offers a bargain. Come forward within a specified period, confess your own sins, denounce others, and you will receive reconciliation and leniency. Refuse, and if you are later discovered, the full weight of the tribunal will fall upon you. This is not merely an offer of mercy. It is a structural trap. To receive reconciliation, one must confess. To confess fully, one must name others. The path to safety runs directly through betrayal. The system does not merely punish dissent. It converts the population into its own intelligence network. It distributes guilt so widely that no one remains innocent, and it destroys the horizontal trust that binds communities together. Neighbors cease to speak freely. Business partners hesitate before entering agreements. Families contract into closed circles, suspicious even of their own members. The social fabric does not tear all at once. It unravels slowly, thread by thread, as each person calculates the risk of every human connection. What drove this system was not, in the first instance, religious zeal. It was economics, structured with ruthless clarity. The Inquisition was explicitly designed to be self-financing. It did not depend upon papal funding or royal subsidy. It paid its own salaries, covered its own administrative costs, and enriched its officers through the confiscation of accused persons' property. The seizure occurred not upon conviction but upon arrest, a procedural detail of staggering consequence. A man could be found innocent and still lose everything. His family reduced to beggary, his commercial relationships destroyed. More commonly, of course, the institution found ways to ensure that guilt was established, because the institution had to eat. It was structurally hungry. Contemporary observers recognized this openly. Pope Sixtus IV, who had authorized the tribunal in 1478, issued a bull in 1482, Ad Perpetuum Rei Memoriam, protesting that in Aragon, the inquisitors were moved not by zeal for faith, but by lust for wealth, that they used testimony from enemies, rivals, and slaves to imprison Christians without legitimate proof. The papacy's protests were not heeded. They were systematically ignored, revealing a structural truth that would define the institution for its entire existence. The highest religious authority could not constrain an institution it had created. The Inquisition answered to the crown, not to Rome. It was, in essence, a ministry of the Spanish government operating under the ceremonial vestments of the Church. The financial incentive shaped everything. The geography of persecution reveals what the theology conceals. Inquisitorial activity concentrated not in areas of greatest heretical deviation, but in wealthy municipalities, in commercial centers, among the educated and commercially active converso population. The conversos, descendants of Jews who had converted to Christianity, often under duress during the mass violence of 1391, had risen to positions of prominence in government, the church, and business. They represented, to the old Christian elite, not merely a theological ambiguity, but an economic and social competition. The doctrine of limpeza de sangre, purity of blood, transformed this economic resentment into a racial hierarchy, allowing the systematic exclusion of conversos from public office, professional guilds, and economic opportunity, while transferring their wealth and status to those who could prove an unblemished Christian lineage. The language was spiritual hygiene. The operation was predatory redistribution. The Cortes of Castile, the kingdom's representative body, understood this perfectly. They petitioned for reform of the Inquisition's financial structure in 1525, 1537, 1538, 1548, 1548, and 1555. They recognized that an institution which funded itself through the punishment of those it investigated would inevitably develop a vested interest in finding guilt. Their objections were recorded, filed, and ignored. The mechanism had become too useful to too many powerful interests to be reformed. The Crown used it to centralize authority across fragmented territories with distinct legal traditions and powerful local nobilities. The inquisitorial class used it to secure economic autonomy, compensation through confiscations and canonries, and insulation from both ecclesiastical and popular oversight. The old Christian elites used it to eliminate commercial rivals, and ordinary citizens used it, through anonymous denunciation, to settle personal grievances, eliminate competitors, or acquire property, externalizing the moral cost of persecution onto the population itself. Everyone had an incentive to keep the machine running. No one had sufficient incentive to stop it. The auto da fe, the public sentencing ceremony, reveals the system's understanding of its own requirements with crystalline precision. Francisco Peña stated in 1578 that these spectacles were necessary for education and to terrify. They were not merely punishments. They were mass rituals of ideological reinforcement, carefully staged to allow the spectators to participate vicariously in the destruction of the deviant, to internalize the cost of deviation, and to confirm their own innocence through the visible suffering of the accused. The condemned, dressed in the San Benito, paraded through the streets, reconciled or burned, provided a cathartic release for the community's anxieties, while simultaneously renewing those anxieties. The message was not subtle. It was inscribed into the architecture of the spectacle itself. This is what happens to those who differ. This is what happens to those who are accused. And since accusation is anonymous and guilt is presumed, this could happen to anyone. The terror was not in the severity of the punishment alone. It was in the impossibility of calculating risk. Any social interaction carried latent danger. Any friendship could be a trap. Any conversation could be reported, distorted, weaponized. The population did not need to be policed directly. It policed itself, self-censoring not because of any specific threat, but because the architecture of fear made the cost of openness incalculable. The psychological dynamics within the tribunal itself are equally revealing. The inquisitors were not, for the most part, sadists in the conventional sense. They were bureaucrats operating within a system that provided them with elaborate procedures for self-deception. They could believe that confessions extracted under torture were true if repeated the following day because the manual told them so. They could believe that anonymous testimony was reliable because the institution's procedures validated it. They could believe that they served truth because the institution's language was saturated with references to faith and salvation. This is the cognitive dissonance of institutional loyalty, the capacity of ordinary humans to maintain a self-conception as seekers of justice while engaging in systematic coercion, provided that the coercion is formalized, ritualized, and embedded in a structure that distributes responsibilities so widely that no single person need feel personally culpable. The inquisitor does not kill the condemned man. The state does. The state does not invent the charge. The anonymous accuser does. The accuser does not judge the charge. The inquisitor does. Responsibility is fragmented and circular, and in the center of the circle the mechanism turns without a hand upon it. The system expanded according to an inevitable logic. Created originally to investigate converso heresy, it soon discovered that its original targets were insufficient to sustain its appetite. Crypto-Judaism, Crypto-Islam, and Crypto-Lutheranism together comprise less than half of its total activity. The majority of its caseload involved moral offenses, blasphemy, bigamy, political dissent, and behaviors that threatened royal authority. The definition of deviance widened continuously because the institution required continuous deviance to justify its existence. When conversos were expelled or eliminated, the Inquisition did not dissolve. It shifted to censorship, to moral policing, to the surveillance of political behavior. It lasted 356 years, not because its original religious mission remained urgent, but because it had become a permanent bureaucracy serving multiple power structures, royal centralization, elite competition, narrative control. Bureaucracies do not dissolve when their target disappears. They find new targets. They generate new categories of threat. They perpetually regenerate the enemies they need to survive. The long-term consequences of this mechanism extended far beyond the lives it directly destroyed. Because the Inquisition was particularly suspicious of the educated, literate middle class, because it discouraged intellectual exchange and penalized innovation, it systematically degraded the human capital of Spanish society. Municipalities that experienced mid-range inquisitorial exposure today show a 5.6% lower share of the population receiving higher education compared to unexposed areas, controlling for other variables. Areas with greater persecution remain markedly poorer centuries later. The mechanism operated through persistently lower social trust and reduced educational attainment, trapping regions in low equilibrium outcomes that persist across generational time horizons. The institution claimed to defend the faith, yet its long-run effect was to weaken the very society it purported to protect, suppressing the commercial and intellectual dynamism that might have allowed Spain to adapt to a changing world. There is a paradox at the heart of how this institution is remembered. Protestant and Dutch propagandists during the 16th and 17th centuries exaggerated Inquisition atrocities to demonize Spain, creating a mythological version that served their own geopolitical interests. This black legend, as it is known, was propaganda, but the existence of propaganda does not negate the reality beneath it. The institution did conduct over 100,000 trials. It did seize property upon arrest. It did use torture. It did execute thousands. The myth and the reality operated on separate tracks, one external and exaggerated, the other internal and systematic, and both obscured the deeper truth that this was never primarily about religion. The Spanish monarchs used Catholicism as an excuse, and the Inquisition as an instrument to enforce their unique criteria upon all the social, political, and ideological diversity of the Iberian Peninsula. Supporters believed it defended the faith. Enemies believed it primarily targeted Protestants. Neither narrative captured the reality of an institution that was fundamentally political and economic in function, using religion as its operating system, its interface, its vocabulary of legitimation. The illusion that sustained it was ancient and recurring. The belief that social cohesion can be achieved through the elimination of internal difference, that purity is possible, that the removal of the impure will leave behind a unified and healthy body politic. In practice, the pursuit of purity produced not unity, but fragmentation. By destroying trust and suppressing intellectual diversity, the institution degraded the adaptive capacity of Spanish society. It reveals a civilizational pattern that reappears across centuries and continents. The conviction that formalized cruelty is equivalent to rigor, that process can legitimate outcomes that violate basic reason, that an institution which funds itself through the punishment of those it investigates can remain impartial, that a society which rewards citizens for reporting on their neighbors will retain the social capital necessary for cooperation and innovation. The man in the stone room does not know that the institution questioning him will outlive him by centuries. He does not know that his confession, extracted through psychological domination and the threat of torture, will be used to incriminate others, who will in turn incriminate more in a chain reaction of betrayal that will consume entire communities. He does not know that the property seized from him will pay the salaries of his interrogators, creating in them a vested interest in his guilt that no procedural safeguard can overcome. He knows only that he is alone, that the accuser he cannot face has already won, that the only remaining choice is between the manner of his destruction and the faint hope that cooperation might spare his family. He does not know that this same architecture of fear, this same merger of judicial and executive power, this same self-financing predation, this same transformation of neighbors into informants, has appeared elsewhere under other names, wearing other uniforms, speaking other languages of purification and security. He knows only the weight of the room, the cold of the stone, the sound of papers being shuffled, and the slow, dawning understanding that the verdict was decided before he ever entered, that the trial is theater and that the theater is the point. The mechanism does not need him to be guilty. It needs him to be processed. It needs the confession. It needs the spectacle. It needs the next accusation, and the next, and the next because a machine that feeds on what it punishes can never stop. It can only keep finding new subjects, new deviances, new threats, converting human beings into the fuel that keeps the wheels turning century after century, wearing different masks, speaking different justifications, but always turning, always hungry, always demanding that someone sit in the stone room and believe, finally, that resistance was never possible, that the system already knew everything, that the only rational choice was to confess, to names, to become part of the machinery, and to hope, against all evidence, that this time the machine would be satisfied. It never is.